Welcome to For Better or For Worse. We are going to have an honest discussion on marriage and the immigration law. Joining me today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hashi Ricards, and I'm an attorney based out of Orlando, Florida. And I practice immigration law and also estate planning. So I'm so happy to join Amanda today on her live.
Thank you, Hashi. And I'm attorney Amanda Shaffer. I practice immigration, family, criminal law up New York City and the tri-state area. We'll give everybody a few minutes to join us. And while we do that, quick disclaimer, obligatory disclaimer here, that nothing that we say here today constitutes legal advice. We will be happy to answer your questions in general. And it will nothing we say here will form an attorney-client relationship. We do strongly advise if you have any real legal issues that you need an attorney for to contact us privately. On screen, you will find our phone numbers. And we'll also post, I'll do it right now in the comments, our emails. And actually you can write in the comments as well. So what we're going to do here today is talk about marriage and the immigration law. There's lots of questions people have about what a marriage is supposed to look like, how you prove your marriage is real, what the process is, how do you know when the marriage isn't going so well, things like that. So just an open discussion that at any time, if you have questions, comments, concerns, feel free to, my thing just fell here, to ask us. And again, we are available outside of this as well to help you. So let's start getting into it. First, we wanted to explain why we even thought about doing this in the first place.
Right. When did it happen? A couple of weeks ago, right? We were just chatting up a storm in one of our group chats.
Yes. Without some other immigration attorneys across the country. I had a case that, if you watch our notable approvals, you may have seen, was about a 17-year-old who married an immigrant who now has a green card. But when she was 17 in New York, you have to be 18 in order to get legally married without court permission. So we had to go to the court, get court permission, and then they got married and applied for his green card. And before I did the live, I realized that it might be a controversial topic because there's not every day in this country that you see someone that age get married or have to get a court order for permission. And she is Muslim. Her family's from Bangladesh. And I knew in this group that everybody was of different, cultural backgrounds. So I was like, I wanted some help on how to approach it because I didn't want to offend anybody. And at the same time, like, you have to be careful with how you say things. I just wanted to be sensitive of that. And Hashi was one of the people that really helped me, like a neutral and just like factual tone with it.
Right. And when she mentioned the age 17, I was like, wow, that's old, because my grandmother got married when she was 13, I mean, this is going back years, but back
marriage.
Yeah. They got married at young ages, actually, when they were ready to bear children. So we got on this topic. We said this would be great for an actual, like, a live discussion about this, And I have to say, with Amanda, she was really, obviously, practicing immigration law, you have to be already a pretty open person, but she was so receptive to hearing a lot of the things that I was talking about culturally, speaking from my knowledge of Indian marriage and Indian clients and things like that. So.
Yeah, and I have a lot of clients from that area. I mean, in Africa too, I have a lot of clients who are married at very young ages, and age often becomes a factor with immigration law and green cards and stuff, regardless of what aspect you're talking about. So here We're talking about, is it okay for somebody at such a young age to get married versus is it okay for someone to marry someone 30 years apart? Or I've had cousins getting married, and I think what's important to know how to answer any of these questions, if there is an answer, is first to say, well, what is a legal marriage?
Right. So what is a legal marriage, and where do you look to find out if that marriage is legal, right? So if it's a marriage taking place outside of the United States, you look at the, did you say something?
I was saying hi to Finley. He said hello.
Oh, hey. You look at the location and the time and the date where the marriage took place, right? So again, let's just use India for an example. If two people got married in India, you look at the law in India at the time and location, and see if it was a valid marriage under that law in that state and that country. And by the way, the burden is on who? The burden is on the petitioner, right?
Yes.
Right.
In India, is there any places, any situations where there may not be a paper record of the marriage?
Right. So we were talking about this too, that oftentimes, in India, you can have a religious marriage, and sometimes it doesn't have to be recorded, but under the Hindu Marriage Act, which encompasses not just Hindus, but other religions as well, you can actually get it registered with the registrar of marriage. And then if you're doing a non-religious marriage, it's under I think it's called the Special Marriage Act, right? And so you can record it there. Now this is current, but back in the day, it was like written down in a little book that no one knew where that was. So I actually gave Amanda an example of someone who thinks they have a fiance, right? So they're petitioning them to come on a K1 to come to the States to get married. But in actuality, they go over there and they have a religious.
K1's the 90-day fiance visa.
Sorry, yes, the 90-day, right?
Within 90 days of entering the country. Sorry.
No, I apologize for just spewing off letters. But right, so they go over there and meet their fiance and end up having a religious ceremony, thinking, hey, this is not a valid marriage because it's not registered civilly like it would be done here in the States. And in actuality, they've actually got married. And so they now have to prove that they're not trying to evade immigration laws by lying about a marriage that took place and really petitioning a fiance to come over. So interesting.
And then you have that also becoming a problem with the divorce.
Right. Exactly.
Like places where marriages aren't recorded, a lot of times divorces are. I have an asylum case right now that we're appealing because it got denied and I've never had this get denied for this reason. My client's from Mali, and in Mali, like they like a lot of other places in Africa, and I'm sure across the world, they still do like traditional marriages, religious marriages, and yet it is a more modern day thing where marriages are all recorded, but in a lot of places they're just not still. So, right. So my client, this was an issue with her asylum. She put down that she was married, and that it was her husband's family that was persecuting her. Mm. And the judge was like, well, where's the marriage certificate? And I go, Your Honor, there is no marriage certificate. This is a religious marriage. They gave, a dowry, and that was it. And they can't get divorced because her parents can't pay it back.
Right.
There still wouldn't be a paper, but right. The judge didn't believe that they were married because there was no marriage certificate, and it was a whole mess. But right. That you get into these problems. I had someone in the other day with a similar issue where they said they were married because they had a religious marriage. So they applied for their B2 visitor visa, said they were married, which it helps to be married to get visitor visas. Mm. Were approved, came to the US, never got an official divorce because they never had a paper to show they were married. Now they married a US citizen and they can't show they were divorced. So, right. So it's like, they're like, well, what do we put on the form? I'm like, but they know you're married already. You said you were married, and now we're trying to figure out how can we get them a divorce from here, because right. No jurisdiction requirements in New York, even though they would have, serve a person in that country. It's just it can make things very difficult with these paper requirements, things you never think about.
Things you never think, exactly. And so you're still working on that one, huh? Trying to figure out how to do that.
Yes. Hi, Sonia. Thank you for joining us. Can you see everybody's comments, Hashi?
Yeah, but I'm like, it's so small on this little surface. But yes, hello. It says I have a long, complicated immigration issue question. Okay. So, do you see that?
I do. Well, we're not really here for complicated questions. We'll do our best. We could certainly answer those outside of today's live. But let's get into a little bit more. We're talking about legal marriages and if there needs to be a paper. And what's clear, the most important thing to remember is that if the marriage is legal in the jurisdiction where you get married, then the marriage is legal in the eyes of immigration law, U.S. immigration.
And also I would add, for that marriage to be legal, if you were married prior, make sure to have the divorce, like you said, the divorce decrees as well, right? Okay, so once you've done all that, once you've established, the existence of this legal marriage, what is the next step, Amanda?
Oh, you have to prove that you're marrying in good faith, and that's what's called a bona fide marriage.
From day one.
I'm sorry?
From day one, right? From day one.
Yes. Well, the day one of before you even get married, we'll talk about, there's arranged marriages, we'll get into that, but not complicate the definition. The person that you are marrying, or you're telling immigration that you married, you have to intend to share a life together. And your primary purpose for getting married cannot be to get a green card. Now, it could be, it could be a benefit of getting married. That's okay. But you're marrying this person. I always say to my clients, do you love this person? Do you want to spend the rest of your life with this person? If the answers are yes, you're going to be fine.
Right. And sometimes I don't ask, do you love them? Because in some of my cases, there is no love at the beginning. But do you intend to spend your lives together and make your life together, right?
So are you talking more for arranged marriages or other marriages?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of clients that have had arranged marriages?
No, but in those circumstances, not a lot, but for those clients, yes, you have to ask, you have to phrase the question in that way, because, an arranged marriage, and I've known this from childhood, is that you love after you get married, right? Especially if it's an arranged marriage that you really have no part in really choosing your spouse. It's more like a union of two families, right? And so a lot of times your spouse is picked for you way in advance prior to you even knowing. So
do you find that those type of marriages tend to last longer or have less likely to end in divorce or separation than non-arranged marriages? Do you not see any pattern?
I think the older arranged marriages probably were less likely to end in divorce. But nowadays, people are divorcing in India now, right? And so times are changing. So it's sort of moving more to mimicking like the, Western society. And I'll leave it at that.
And that's a great point. Like, I shouldn't be saying, that shouldn't be my question to my clients. I've had some clients with arranged marriages, very few, but like, essentially it doesn't matter to me what the situation is. I don't ever assume one way or another, but I do say the love thing all the time. And, you're right, that's not the definition of marriage. And that's kind of our point here, that there isn't like one mold you have to fit into. I get so many questions from clients concerned that, like, here's my situation. They'll give me a set of facts. They're like, are they going to believe us? Is immigration going to believe us?
Right. And also, I think clients have to be careful to not present such a perfect, rosy picture, because in reality, a relationship, a bona fide relationship, a bona fide marriage is not 100% happy and perfect. So like we can get into this in a little bit, but the bona fides will be like real text messages between people, not every picture is us hugging and kissing, just real pictures and those sort of things to reflect a real relationship rather than some picture perfect thing that may look too fake,
Yeah. Good evening, Charmaine. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. No, totally. I actually, like, when clients, I've had plenty of situations where like the clients like had some marital problems, and then they get their interview notice and they come to me and they're like, I'm mad at him or her. Like, we're fighting, like we've been fighting. Thank you, Farah. Thanks for joining. And
Farah. Yes.
And then they'll be all worried, like, what if, like, they ask me, like, what happened during these 2 months, and we separated. I'm like, that's okay. Like,
Right.
marriage get in fights. That's okay.
Right.
Like, it would be weird if we didn't get into a fight ever.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm engaged. I should be married, but thank you, COVID. And you're married for a while.
Yes, yes.
And I love my fiance more than anything, but there's definitely times, like, he pisses me off, and there's definitely times we fight. It's not much, but it happens. If it didn't, I'd actually be worried.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've known my husband for like 26 years. So believe me, there's been some times, but that's part of a real relationship, and that's why I always say each case, each couple that comes to you is, you treat it as its own, right? And so there's no template,
Right. Like, people tell me, what could I get? And I say, I have a list of evidence that you can get, but it's all going to matter about what makes sense to your own life. If you're not, if you don't know how to invest money, don't get an investment account and add your spouse as a beneficiary just to show immigration. I had a client today, actually, who I'm not getting into the situation. We shouldn't be filing an I-751, but we are, because immigration is fantastic. But she gives me a bank account, and there were only four transactions in the month. I go, I'm not submitting this. It was a joint bank account. And she's like, why not? And I'm like, because she goes, well, yeah, we don't really use it. You have it to show immigration. I'm like, well, there you go. That's why.
Right. That's not actually commingling or showing any activity in that account. So that's a negative.
And certain things that you don't just put it in to make your file like grow. That doesn't help. You have to be smart about the evidence, and we'll talk about that a little more. Let's see. We have a question here. I gotta learn how to do this.
Look at you, Amanda, all fancy with the stream.
Became like K1 Fiance Visa 19 years ago. Didn't get married at the time. So I already do 20. Oh, I think you asked me this question the other day, Finley. Yeah. The problem with K1 Fiance Visas is they're very, very strict about them. If you do not marry that person and then adjust your status based on that marriage for the person who filed for you, there's almost nothing you're going to be eligible for without leaving this country. So it's either get married in 90 days to that person, or leave the country. And if you don't, there's very severe consequences.
Are you frozen? You're frozen.
Are you frozen?
Now you're not frozen. No, I'm not frozen. You were frozen. Am I frozen to you?
I'm not frozen.
And that's interesting, that situation there, because he is the immediate relative of the son then, right? In that situation, but he didn't get married within the 90-day requirement, but they had a child together, according to what.
And we did have a child together. Yeah. That's unfortunate that, we've had this situation before, and really there's waivers out there, but they're very difficult to get in a situation like this. And that's a little more complicated for what we're talking about today. But that's the thing. That is a humongous difference. Because if you instead got married first and then brought your spouse over, even if your spouse ended up even if they got a 2-year green card and something, it's just easier to deal with if you guys separate than if you K1. And that's because they don't want people pretending they're going to get married and never get married and staying here. Because it's not a huge, all you have to do for K1 is show you met in person at least once within the last 2 years, that you're legally able to get married, meaning you're of age and you're not married to someone else, and that you want to get married within the 90 days the person enters the country.
Unless you have a waiver, right? In some countries, you can get a waiver for that in-person meeting requirement.
Yes, you can. You can. There are some exceptions that they're hard to get the exceptions because we've tried, except there is still that option for mail order brides. Have you seen that?
Right. Yeah, I did. And I didn't know we were going to talk. I'm not too well versed on that. If anyone wants to jump in.
I can't say I am either. We got another question. Do people in the situation have other options if they have citizen kids?
Yes. Well,
they
no, not with the K1, right? Not with the K.
no, not
Not,
with the K1.
yeah.
No, basically, I don't even know if they did. Are they even eligible for cancellation?
Farah, do you know the answer?
Yeah, are you know the answer? Or
This was like me last week asking that question.
you stumped us last week. But no, there's a basic principle that you follow when it comes to K1s, without knowing if there are waivers and exceptions for most things. K1s are on like the harsher end of the scale. Basic. Oh, if you know, Farah, we're ready. We're ready. But it's on the harsher end of the scale, and that the options, if you do not marry that person and adjust from that based on marriage to that person, are few and far between. I think like withholding of removal. I think because there's always withholding of removal, pretty much, even for like ag fells, there's withholding of removal. Maybe cancellation. It could be a specific bar to cancellation. I'd have to check. And there is there a waiver for? I don't think there's a general K1 waiver in that regard. There's a waiver to get a K1,
right?
For other
person meeting requirement.
Yeah, that's
I think Farah is typing her answer. Okay,
all right. We're ready for it.
I'm gonna say. Oh, and by the way, if people aren't sure, like I don't know every civil document in every country, so you can always go online, right, to that travel.state.us.gov, whatever that site is, and look up the requirement for your country and what is acceptable, right, as a document. So that being said, I think we've established the legal part of the marriage, right? Now we're going to do the.
So then that brings us to, and I will say just one more note on that because we touched on the divorces, and this is important. You mentioned earlier that make sure you're divorced. I mean, it happens a lot more than you would think it happens. That I have a client come in that tells me that they're divorced or remarried, and I say, well, let me see the divorce, and it turns out they're not actually divorced because they're not handing me a judgment of divorce. They're handing me like an affidavit of defendant.
Right.
It is very important that a lot of times you'll let the ex just handle the divorce. If you don't have kids or assets, you might just sign a paper, might not do anything and get divorced.
Exactly.
Make sure you know what is in those documents. A, so you can verify that you are divorced, and B, it's important what it says, because we've had a couple of situations where in New York you have to be irreconcilably have irreconcilable differences for at least 6 months before you get divorced.
Right.
So people that want to file for divorce before 6 months are up, and they'll lie and say they're separated already. But if you're telling immigration you're still together, you later get divorced and it says you're separated, you're going to have a problem. So make sure you know what is in these divorce documents.
Right.
As a side note, I just want to point it out.
What does she say? I can't even, my computer. Okay.
Finley joined us on my live last Thursday with Aaron, and we talked a little bit about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, Finley, that's definitely a better conversation to have privately. Give us a call. We'll talk about it more. We're happy. We'll see if we can help. But we want to get into now a little bit more of different scenarios with marriages and what it's like, and then how we can prove them.
What about like the so do you want to do a long distance marriage, right? A long distance meeting, and then actually leads to that question that I got. Okay. So we can use that question as an example, right? So someone messaged me and said she met her boyfriend, right? It became her boyfriend overseas. Then she came back. So she's a U.S. citizen. So she came back to the States. They got married over there, and then like 2 years later, and she returned back to the U.S. and he's still there. And so they want a consular process, but she is worried about or thinking about how are they what bona fides can they use, right? And so Amanda and I were talking about that. So in a relationship like that, what can you show for bona fides? Well, we're so lucky now in this day and age with the internet. So you can show emails with each other and WhatsApps with each other, right? Will they probably not have any joint assets, like no joint ownership of property yet, right, Amanda? That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's the difficulty, especially when you have someone abroad.
Right.
Like I've had these conversations too, where like they're not here to open joint bank accounts and stuff like that. So that stuff is good, definitely.
Some really, really strong affidavits, not one or two lines like, yo, I was at their wedding and it was good. No, we need like, do you know about their relationship? Were you at, like, say, I don't know where she met him at. Let's just assume she met him. She was over there for school or whatever. Were you a part of their relationship? How did they meet? What types of things do they do together? Like their love story, right? That's a really good, strong supporting affidavit to support this marriage, right? What else? Social media, if they had any.
Now, I do want to make one note on social media.
Tell me.
People to keep in mind that if I can see it, USCIS can see it.
Right. Even if it's private, right? Even if your page is like, well, if it's private, they can still somehow.
They're sneaky over there. They can get in there. They make you give them your handles and stuff for social media these days. I just want to say hi to Beatrice and Iffy and Augie. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you're enjoying the topic. If you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask. Yes. But what was I saying? I get distracted by trying to be on a broadcast thing.
So we were talking about that type of scenario, like a long distance. So these two people, right? This person that messaged me, obviously they're in love. So they have some sort of like bona fides. They can prove, I think they have a pretty good case. It may not be joint ownership, the typical things that you may see if they had their life here, right? In the States.
Yeah. I mean, and on that note though, the ones that I've done like that seem to be easier to get approved. And by that, I mean, they're able to get more evidence and we don't get requests for evidence. They usually have a big wedding, like an Indian wedding or something abroad. They've only met once or twice. I've had a couple of those because a lot of the ones we see in the US for one reason or another, I had a couple in April get married who they were just planning to get engaged, but then coronavirus hit.
Right.
We couldn't go back home. So they decided, let's just, pull the plug, get married now. We'll have a ceremony and whatever later. Maybe you can't afford to have a big thing. So we see it a lot less in the US, but abroad when that happens, like huge, big weddings definitely are good evidence to show. But of course, just because you have a big wedding does not mean that you have a real marriage either. It's not like that proves anything, which
That's true.
Which is kind of what our overall point is here, that there's not one thing that if you have is going to guarantee that immigration will think you have a real marriage. There's just not.
Right.
Even kids help. They're at the top of our list.
Right. So let's go over. I told him, man, let's play a little fun game where we like name some bona fides that we've used. Right. So kids are a great bona fide.
Make sure you're on the birth certificate, both parents.
Right. What about Will's will? And Farah can talk about this, the advanced directives, right?
Yeah.
Who did you name?
Our proxies and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Life insurance?
Health, any insurance, all insurance.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are a lot. Some of this stuff you need social security numbers for. Some of it you don't. I could write you a will tomorrow, and it could just be like, I'm giving all my money to you.
Right.
Whatever it is. So it's important to keep in mind too. You're not going to have joint taxes if you don't have a social security number, for example.
Right. I can't see these. I don't know how to blow up these comments, but I see more coming. I don't know if are they saying anything?
I'm not seeing it unless they pause.
Oh, the one is Aggie. Hello, great topic. Hi. It's like weird seeing us on, well, you see us on our live, but never together. We're always chatting at the same time. What about, Amazon account? If
I've
you,
done that too, showing the shipping addresses. Yep.
both of you are on the same account, ordering stuff on there. Vet, dog, you both are on the vet.
I am doing one right now where I have a hamster receipt.
There you go. If that's not evidence of a bona fide marriage, I don't know.
You can't buy a hamster together. That's forever,
and then we talked about, I don't know if we mentioned it, the joint ownership of a home or a lease, cars, all those things.
Helpful. Yeah.
Right.
And
with an arranged marriage, I wanted to say, like, let's take an arranged marriage where they don't know each other. I think the best evidence in that case is, again, really, really strong affidavits from both sides of the family. And it shouldn't be affidavits where you're talking about the bio data of the kids. No one cares about that. We want to know why these two families have combined together and decided for them to get married. Instead of talking about their education and their degrees and all the bragging about all that, that's not the important part. The important part is showing, hey, you know what? We're not lying about this arranged marriage. This was an arranged marriage, but it's a real marriage, right? And in our culture, in our tradition, in our family, this is what we do, and we'll fall in love later. We intend to spend our life together. We intend to raise children together. Because I think people, and that leads to the other question we talked about, Amanda, which is, are USCIS officers, both here and also at the consular post, are they equipped to recognize, to be able to non-judgmentally, I should say,
to weed out the liars?
Yeah, right.
Supposedly, yes.
Yeah.
They are human beings, of course.
Right.
I always tell my clients when they're getting ready for their interview, they are trained to look for liars and to see who's telling the truth. So sometimes how you answer a question is just as important as the answer itself. It's also why I instruct clients that if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know. Do not answer it. Same with, I don't understand. If you don't understand the question, say, I don't understand. Let them ask again. There a lot of times is language barriers with these interviews, because people want to do them in English, even if it's, they're not that strong. And you in these interviews, you can have an interpreter if you want, but it's really up to you, because that can become an issue too. Like, have you had clients where like the immigrant did not really speak English and the citizen did not speak the other language?
Right. Oh, by the way, that's a red flag too, right? That's a red flag. It's like, oh, how are you all talking? How are you all communicating if you both don't speak the same language? I personally haven't had that. You've had where they don't speak the same language?
Mm-hmm. I've had a client in a marriage interview have to prove she was learning to speak French.
Okay. And where do they meet, by the way? They met over there. Okay.
I just remember. I remember that one, because like the officer actually said to her, "Wait, how do you guys communicate?" Like, right. Could not really like understand the English. But that and I also tell my clients that no couple will get every single answer correct, no matter how much in love you are, no matter how real your marriage is, no matter how arranged your marriage is. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, some of the questions they ask, I'm like, I don't even know that about my husband, who I've known since 1996. So, I mean, how are they?
I want to do like a newlywed game thing, like to see who, like, can the average person ask some of these questions? One of the hardest questions I find people have is name all of your spouse's tattoos.
Really? Yeah. Okay.
Everyone.
Wow. But you know what, Amanda? I mean, I tell any my clients, listen, assume that this officer thinks your marriage is fraudulent, because that's really where they're coming from. And so it's your job to like you're starting down here and you're building up your case, right? And if you go from there, you're going to help us help you, right? So bring all the stuff, give us everything, everything. You can never have too much. You know.
That's an interesting approach. I think I go about it complete opposite. I go about it saying their job is to pretend they don't believe you.
Right. Same.
You have a real marriage. You know your marriage is real. You have to be confident when you go in there, and you have nothing to hide. That's how I do it.
That's true. They have nothing to hide. So be real. Like, so if it was just be as you normally are, don't put on any pretenses, right?
Exactly. And if you guys are looking for other interview tips, another thing is when your spouse is asked a question, you do not answer it. You do not look at one another.
Right.
And vice versa, because that makes their blood boil, the USCIS officers. They hate that. When you're trying to figure out an answer and you look at your spouse for help, that's like one of their top no-nos.
Right.
So look at me and I'm like, I don't know.
You know what else I had on here? We were talking about, but I don't know if you want to do that now, or you want to go and do some.
Broke up a little. I missed
some red flags.
We could definitely do red flags. Those are always fun in a weird way.
Let's see. Is anyone still watching? Are they still watching? Efi, Aggie, do you guys want to join in? What are red flags?
I'm going to be a Debbie Downer with our first red flag and say any type of physical or emotional violence is a red flag, and that's just a red flag that the relationship shouldn't happen. That doesn't mean it's not a real relationship. So it's a little tangential of a red flag, but that is just a red flag I wanted to point out.
Right. What about disparity in age?
Yeah, I mean, again, this goes back to what we're talking about, like what's normal, what do people expect of a marriage? You know, you feel weird going in there if your spouse is much older or younger than you. And the fact of the matter is that you shouldn't have it doesn't matter. Oh, we got not living together. We'll put this on there on the screen there. Not living together is a red flag too. Now, I've definitely had cases approved where the clients lived apart, but I have to explain there had to be a reason. And it's work related, and there also has to be the intent to later reunite and reside together. But yeah, that for sure, that's a good one. But with the age,
what is it? No, I couldn't see not living together. Okay, right. What about huge cultural differences? You know, I had a client, she came from India and she met someone here and they had huge income disparity and also just a huge cultural gap. And I believe they met, I don't want to get too much into detail in their case, but and again, I'm not the judge, right? It wasn't up to me to judge them, but they had a real wedding. They had pictures, all the things, but that just sort of alerted me in the back of my head, like, what do you have in common? You know what I mean?
That's true. And like, we got a question. We'll get to this in 1 second. But on that note, like, you know, I've definitely seen trouble between cultures, and sometimes there does need to be an explanation. It doesn't mean that you can't marry someone who's a different culture, different race, ethnicity. Not at all. It just means that if you come from really different backgrounds, regardless of its culture or income level or socioeconomic status, whatever that may be, like, you may be questioned on it because it is an outlier. It's not, down the middle. It doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make it any less real. It just means you got to be ready to deal with the question. And that's what we do. We identify those issues for our client, not issues or like areas with our clients and say, how would you respond to this question? Like, you should be taking an interest in your spouse's culture. You should want to learn the language if they have another language, but you don't have to do anything particular, but just be ready to answer it. It's when you're not ready to answer it because you've never thought about it and you've never had that talk with your spouse, that's when you get your red flag.
Exactly. That's such a good point, Amanda. So she's asking, is age differences a problem? I mean, no. I mean, we just were explaining about that. No, I mean, if it's a marriage entered into, a legitimate marriage that you intend to spend your lives together, then the age difference shouldn't be an issue. However, you need to be prepared to defend that age difference,
Yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily say defend as much as I'd say like respond. I mean, because it's not that you have to be defensive about it. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. If you're legally able to marry and you marry, great. But you have to expect those questions and be able to respond to it with, it might not matter to you at all. Like I've had a 30-year difference between clients, and I know it was a real marriage. When I first saw it, I was like, okay, for me, I wouldn't be comfortable with that in my own life, but it's not about me. If they're comfortable and they love each other, or if they want to spend their life together, then that's great. Everybody should be able to spend their life with who they want to be with.
That's true. What about?
Oh, we got another question here about 2 different bank accounts. Thank you for the question, Letitia. Well, that's okay. So having a joint bank account is definitely something we recommend. And you have to use it. Don't just open it to show immigration you opened it and not use it. That doesn't help.
Right. Like don't open it the day before the interview.
Exactly.
And $50 in there and call it a day, You
do not have to close all your individual bank accounts. You can have a joint and an individual. And that's okay too. But again, make sure you're using the joint bank account. And I tell my clients, use the joint bank account for your joint expenses. Use it for your rent, your utilities, things like that. Even if you have your own accounts, you could put money in. You'll be putting money in every month. You'll be using it. And it'll be easy to keep track of your finances too.
Right. Like a lot of couples may have their own separate accounts for their own paycheck, and then they take out whatever portion for whatever they're paying together. So it's both of the spouse have their own account before. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like you don't have to have the joint bank account at all. You're not going to get denied just because you don't have it, but it helps. It helps to have it, and you keep those individual accounts. Let's say, you guys will work out your money and say, we'll put this much from my paycheck, this much from yours, and that's what we're going to use for our joint finances, and that's perfect. It doesn't have to be for every single thing you use it for, but you should be using it on a regular basis, consistent basis.
Exactly. Another point is that if your family or friends are unaware of your marriage,
that's a red flag. I wish I had a red flag banner that I could put up here.
I mean, yeah, where's that feature on Streamer?
I'll figure it out for the next one.
That's another, I found a question it's not a question, it leads to this. It was, it's a same-sex couple that no one really knew that they were together. Their families didn't know. And how do you then, how do you prove something like that? Right. And so with that someone suggested, obviously messages between the two of you, letters between the two of you, if any of your close family or friends knew, maybe not your parents, maybe a sibling or something like that. What other advice would you give someone like that?
Well, I think it again comes down to each individual situation. If what your reason is for not telling your family, if you're in a same-sex relationship and where you're from, it's not accepted. Mm-hmm. So the fact that your family is not writing affidavits in support of your marriage, that's not going to really be questioned.
Right.
I mean, if anything, the question is, why don't we, why weren't your parents there? Because my parents don't accept it. And then they move on. Right. But dealing with the situation where, that sometimes there's cultural reasons that you don't want to tell your family. But if you're dealing with a situation where there is no good reason for not telling your family, that will be a red flag.
Right.
But for the people that it's not, it's because of the situation. Just like you said, you don't have to have affidavits from family and friends. I always tell my clients, like, if you have a totem pole, like on top, the best evidence, you got your birth certificates for your joint children or your shared children.
Right.
Bottom, you got your affidavits and you got your pictures, your damn pictures.
Right.
You don't have pictures. Only if they're pictures.
Yeah, even non-shared children. That's really good proof too. That hey, you decide to spend your life and raise this child who is not even yours. I see another long comment.
Let's see. 30. Okay, that's a long question. If we submit on, I mean, I don't.
Oh, like going to the
New York.
Yeah. I went. Oh, for a different office to do the interview. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we would have to review your case to see.
I can see my face.
Yeah, let me have that one. We would have to review everything, because I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a racial component in there. You can't just file somewhere else. You have to move. If there's like something on the record that shows that there's a discrimination, you could.
I think that's a case-specific question.
Yeah, I don't really know, but I would say the bottom line is, first understand why it's denied before you make assumptions, because it might not make any difference filing elsewhere. I don't know. I can't say there's bias in Texas. I'm not from Texas.
Right.
In New York, I mean, there's certainly, like, these people, USCIS officers are human. They make mistakes. They have certain prejudice and biases that I'm sure get in their way once in a while. But I think overall, they want you to explain things like cultural, racial difference, but they're not going to hold it against you.
Right.
Then we have, but what about spouse who got court marriage, especially in the pandemic? Okay, that's a good question. We touched on this a little bit before. Basically, I actually had a client, this exact situation, who they got married. They were just going to get engaged and get married a few months later, but because of the pandemic, one of them couldn't travel back home. So it was a situation where, well, what do we do? I'm going to be stuck here without being able to work legally, without being able to travel abroad. So they decided to just go for it. I've had plenty. I'm sure, Hashi, that you've had too, plenty of clients who've had just a city hall court marriage, right?
Right. And I mean, her situation is actually perfect. I mean, there's a perfect explanation for that. And it's not even that they're not invited, like, oh, they're not invited because of whatever the actual marriage, but it's the circumstance surrounding the pandemic, right? So that's a great question. And
there's no saying that you can't have a small ceremony now and then get married when you're ready, whether it's financially, whether it's health wise. Like I've said earlier in the broadcast, I am getting married soon in court and then having my actual wedding whenever COVID ends. So,
and you know what, too? I mean, if you think about it, even like if you do go, not you, but if a client goes and has a courthouse wedding or city hall wedding, I mean, that's even more, to me, it's even more proof like they really love each other, in this case, and they really want to get married. And they're not going to wait until maybe saving up money or having some huge wedding or traveling to another country to do this wedding. They just want to be together. I mean, you can look at it that way as well.
That's true. Again, what all of this always comes down to is what the facts are and how they're explained. Right. And that's what's most important, that like there's not one way to go about this. There's not one, you don't have to be a cookie cutter marriage. There's no such thing as that. Like everyone's just different. So it's like, that's why it's so hard sometimes to answer these questions when clients come in, because, I give them this list of evidence and I tell them, get as much as you can. And for each situation is going to be different. I have clients who don't have the money to have retirement or the jobs that give you retirement accounts and investment accounts and whatever else accounts. And so that's fine that you don't have it. But at the same time, you have someone who is like a lawyer that works for a big firm. Maybe they're not required to put their spouse as beneficiary for their accounts. The law just doesn't make those requirements. These are all suggestions on what you can have. And there's also, I'm trying to think of some other good creative marriage evidence that we've used before. I like the hamster one.
Well, like all this Netflix, those streaming things.
Yeah, yep.
Right. Like if you looked at someone's, like your Netflix account or my Netflix, it has my name, my husband, my son. So hello, we're all watching our own things on there. Right. What else can you use?
Oh, you mentioned earlier stepkids. I was going to say emergency contact form from school.
Right. That's a great one too. Yep.
If you're listing your spouse to pick up your child at school, that's huge. That's definitely huge. And one thing that helped, actually, I don't love when kids come to these interviews. Usually they only come when they have to.
Right.
Watch them. Sometimes they're on the application. But I've had before where the baby kind of sold it because the baby was sitting on dad's lap, bouncing up and down. Like clearly it was his stepkid, but clearly the baby knew him, was comfortable with him. And that speaks more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a great one. Well, I can't see. Is there another? I swear, I think it's my eyes. Oh, Sarah, Netflix account. Yeah. And like, what's the other ones? Hulu and all those things. I mean, get creative, and
I've had receipts for like stuff for the wedding, like ring and cake and things like that. When there are better ways to do pictures, like people will come to this. There are things I like the least about when people give me, and I love all my clients and I'm glad they have their evidence. But when they give me a stack of pictures this high, I give it back to them.
Email them and you have to print them.
Oh, I don't have a printer. I don't have a printer. But anyways, so what I tell people is you want like a picture can be worth 1,000 words or nothing, right? You and your spouse should be in every picture, if not most of them. If you have kids, should be in them too. But it should be stuff like that's important, like a birthday, anniversary, a holiday. Like it should be over a time span. Don't go out and take 20 pictures in a weekend and then tell me, oh, look, we went to all these places. Well, when were they taken? Last weekend. Well, I'm not 20 pictures from last weekend. That's not going to help.
Right. Like a nice little chronology, right? Like of the beginning, middle, and like sort of, I'm not end, but you know what I mean? Up until that current date of their relationship, not 50 pictures, like you said, of them last weekend. Right.
And know who is in the pictures with you. That's
right.
I scan everything we send to immigration for our clients. So I'll know what pictures they have.
Right.
We'll bring more pictures to the interview. So I'm not going to have written that out. So you're going to need to know that too. And that's important because it's, you got to remember something important here. I'm sorry, Letitia, we'll get to you in a second because I want to say this without distraction, that when you go into that interview, you're going to be nervous because you're a human being and everyone is nervous. Right. And what you have to remember is you want to make it as easy for yourself as possible. That's why it's okay to show nerves. They know that. It's not okay to be sweating bullets because that's not normal. I mean, you're not on trial for murder, but it is more of an accusatory setting. It's adversarial. So you have to be ready for it. And just know the more comfortable you are with knowing what evidence you have in each other beforehand, the better it's just going to go in general and you don't have to worry as much.
So what about what advice do you give to people to go to a CP interview, consular process interview? They're going by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, those clients I've definitely interacted with less because of where they are. but it's similar advice. Whenever the spouse asks, should I go? I say yes.
Yeah.
If you go, if you can go, that looks even better. But I find the consular processing ones seem to go easier just because, how much can they ask one person without asking the other person?
Right. Exactly.
Your experience with them, if it's different.
Yeah. No, it's the same. Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's easier. It's just different.
It's just different. Right. Exactly. Right. Okay. She was asking about the marriage. Okay. So, right. So depending on what depending on what your specific situation is, we've talked about different marriage scenarios here. A long distance one where you've known each other, and an arranged marriage where you may not know your spouse, and then a marriage based on a relationship here, in the States where you both knew each other here and you built your life together here. So I don't know which one you're referring to, but if you...
Thank you, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Okay.
Oh, I had a red flag. I just thought of a red flag. Just for Letitia, so she knows, we can't, that's a hard question to answer because everyone's going to be different. We sit there and we counsel our clients, we find out about their life and then tell them these are the things that you can get. These are the things that you can be able to get. You're asking the question that we talk about at our consultation and whatnot. So another red flag though, this is a good one, because I have this a lot, is length of time that you dated before you got married, and then whether or not you lived together before you got married. Those are always big things. Do you have a lot of couples who...
Tell me what is that? What's the significance of that? Meaning if they haven't lived together a long time?
So when I say red flag, I don't mean, I'm kind of looking at it in terms of the USCIS officer. So what you can expect if that's your situation to need to be able to respond to at the interview.
Right.
So there's a couple of situations. So one is you're only dating for a few months and then you got married. And you may have lived together, but if you did, it's a very short time. You may not have lived together until after the marriage.
Right.
So I know if we just look at living together, that there's definitely a cultural component there. There are some cultures that will not live together before marriage. And if that's the reason, that there's no issue.
Right.
If it was a financial situation, a geographic situation, that can all be explained.
Right.
But if you have zero reason that you dated for 3 months and then got married without even living together, could it be love at first sight? Of course. But you're going to be questioned about that.
Right. Very interesting.
You don't have a lot of that?
No. You just gave me some food for thought.
Really? I have a lot of those. No, I mean, and another one kind of on the same note is if you got divorced last month and now you're remarried to somebody else, you're going to have to explain that short period of time. Now, look, you could have been separated for 10 years before you got divorced.
Right, exactly.
And that's okay, but it's going to have to be
explained. It's a red flag, definitely. It's definitely a red flag, and you need to be prepared, not defend, but be prepared to explain. Sorry, I'm going to read the next respond, right? Be ready to respond. What does it say? Great. Any situation. I can't see anything.
Yeah, we talked about that. But getting back just to how long you've lived with someone, what's key there is just like if it is a short period of time, you're going to want to show it in other ways more, and let's talk about it. I always walk my clients through a timeline. We talked about a timeline earlier, not necessarily having to write it all down, depends on what you're dealing with, but being able to say, okay, this is when we met. This is who contacted who first after we met. This is how long we dated. This is when we became exclusive. This is when we got engaged. This is when we moved in together. This is when we got married.
A chronology.
And it might not be in that order.
Yeah.
but know all of those dates.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to, I think we're at the hour mark, but that's a great way to end it. You know, have a chronology of of your story, whether it be a love story, like based on a love marriage, or whether it be this arranged marriage that we were talking about. What's the order of events that happened, and that's a great way to, yeah.
So before we wrap up, if there are any other questions, shoot them over now, and we'll be happy to answer. If not, guys, our phone numbers are on the screen. If you're at the Facebook event page, our full contact information is there as well. I think we'll be back. We'll decide how many weeks we'll be back. We'll do this again. If everyone enjoyed it and found it useful, I think so. Thank you all for watching and asking questions, and everyone enjoy your evening.
Yes, have a good night.